Hello, nature enthusiasts. Today, I want to debunk 3 myths about birds. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, there are tons of myths and legends around birds. Many of them are not true. Surprise, surprise. I want to talk about 3 of them today. So, myth number 1 is that ostriches bury their heads in the sand when they're scared. I'm sure most people have heard this. Oh, don't bury your head in the sand. Oh, don't act like an ostrich. Don't bury your head in the sand. Right? Ostriches breathe oxygen. If they bury their head in the sand, they'd suffocate. Ostriches don't bury their heads in the sand. But where did this myth come from? Well, no one is entirely sure, but one perfectly reasonable explanation is that it's a bit of an optical illusion. Ostriches are large birds, but they have comparatively very small heads and thin necks. Female ostriches actually do dig out. They use their bill to dig out a nest, sort of a scrape in the ground, to lay their eggs. Ostriches also sometimes rest sitting on the ground, and they bring their head down. So it's entirely possible that people, before the advent of binoculars and high-end optics, would see an ostrich out in the distance, and it would appear to be basically just a mass of feathers. And then, kind of suddenly, a head would appear. A head would sort of rise up. Where did the head come from? Couldn't see it before. Now we can see it. Must have been buried in the sand. So that's where the idea comes from. Maybe. It's one plausible explanation for where that myth came from. But it is absolutely a myth. Ostriches do not bury their heads in the sand. Myth number 2 I want to talk about today is the idea that if you find a baby bird that's out of its nest and you pick it up and you put it back into its nest, its mother will smell your scent on that bird and abandon the nest. This is also a myth. So, mother birds are very protective of their young. Most mother birds will not easily abandon a nest. There are some species that are very sensitive to disturbance, and if you mess with them at all, they're out, they leave. But most of them don't. And the thing that seems to cause them to abandon their nest is not scent. It's a visual of a predator, and often they don't know that a human is not a predator finding their nest and discovering their babies, and so the mother or the parents will think, okay, you know what? Unfortunately, a predator has found our nest. The predator is probably going to eat our babies, so we should give up and move on. But it's the visual. They need to see it happen. If they don't see it happen, they don't seem to react to smells. Now, again, no one is entirely sure where this myth comes from either. Seems like there are several possible options. I mean, maybe it's just parents not wanting their kids to mess around with baby birds. I don't know. Not really sure where this one comes from, but it's a persistent one. I hear it pretty frequently myself, and I'm guessing you have too. The thing to do if you do find a baby bird that's outside of its nest is usually leave it alone. Most of the time, when a baby bird comes out of its nest, it's because it's starting to become more mobile, it's getting bigger and older and stronger, and it's starting to move out by itself. Maybe it's still under its parents' care, but it's actually able to move under its own power. It can walk, it can jump, maybe it's starting to learn how to fly, and sometimes learning to fly involves falling out of a nest. But it's okay. Most of the time, when you find a baby bird, leave it alone. It's okay. Its parents are around somewhere. They're taking care of it. It's learning how to fly. It's doing its own thing. So don't worry about putting it back in its nest at all. Myth number 3 that I wanted to talk about today is the idea that owls can turn their heads 360 degrees. Now, it's pretty easy to think where this myth came from. I mean, if you look at an owl, and if you've ever seen an owl swivel its head around, they can turn their heads a lot. But it can't go all the way around. Owls have cervical vertebrae. Those cervical vertebrae are attached to each other, and they don't have enough flexibility to actually get 360 degrees all the way around a complete full circle. Now, what they do have is twice as many cervical vertebrae as you and I have. So humans have 7 cervical vertebrae. In fact, mammals have 7 cervical vertebrae, and the cervical vertebrae are the vertebrae that make up your neck. So we have 7. And each one of those represents a little joint that allows for some flexibility. And so we can turn our heads back and forth. Birds have 14 cervical vertebrae. And so that allows for a lot more flexibility than we have. They can turn their heads probably 270 degrees. So an owl can turn its head 3/4 of a circle, which does allow it to look over this shoulder and then whip all the way around and look over that shoulder. So you can see, I could definitely see how somebody watching one of these owls turn their heads that far would think, oh gosh, they can just keep spinning. They can just keep turning. But they can't quite. Those cervical vertebrae are attached. They do allow for a lot of flexibility, but not complete flexibility. And so owls cannot turn their heads 360 degrees in a full circle. So those are the 3 myths that I had for you today. There are lots more myths out there. If there's something that you know is a myth, or something that you're just kind of curious, I've heard this about birds, and I don't know if it's a myth or not, leave it in the comments, and we can have a conversation about it. We can talk about what is a myth and what is not a myth regards to birds. And if a lot of these pile up, and if you like this video, I'll do another myth debunking video. But for now, that's what I got today. Thank you very much for the view. Subscribe to the channel. And until next time, enjoy the natural world.